Is the hobby so out of control that it needs to be regulated? Let's dive in.
I'm feeling good. Getting better. Feeling good. I can't let it go. I'm feeling good. 'Cause I never say never.
Hello, and here we go. Welcome to another episode of The Geoff Wilson Show. Another day, another scam. Breakers pocketing big cards, repacks missing promised hits, shill bidders shilling, trimmers trimming. We can all agree that this has no place in the hobby. Maybe the hobby needs a regulatory board or coalition to clean some of this up. But what exactly should they clean up? What about breakers who pull their shirts off and make crass jokes? Are they entertainers or problem children in need of regulation? What about flippers who don't collect and are just into cards to make money? Are they entrepreneurs or despicables that need their hand slapped? And what about content creators who pump their own cards? Or social media accounts that spread rumors that are often wrong? Does a coalition need to run them out of the hobby? And that's where the challenge lies. Everyone agrees the hobby needs to be a safe, friendly place for everyone, but almost no one agrees on where the lines should be drawn. And while the idea behind forming a regulatory board is noble, how do you keep it from reaching too far? It's complicated, but it's a worthwhile discussion. And discuss it we will, because today I'm joined by a very special guest, Teapot. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Geoff. This is a bigger conversation than charts and graphs, which I am usually accustomed to.
That is right. Well, it is nice to have Tyler Nethercott, of course, our VP of Product Development here on the Geoff Wilson Show. Normally, you're doing data dive or cards on the table, but today you're coming in for Kelly because this is a topic that I know you are very passionate about. And there's been a lot of chatter on social media recently about the idea of collectors getting together and forming some type of board or something of that nature. And you've had a lot of thoughts about that, and that got you thinking. I know you have a lot you want to discuss and perhaps debate with me today.
I've got several pages of notes, and it's not because it's scripted, but it's because there's so much to unpack with this that I got to make sure I don't lose my train of thought. Obviously, a lot has changed in the hobby in the last 3 to 5 years. Nobody is denying that. There's a lot of people who aren't very happy about that. And I get it. When it's something that's your thing, it's your paradigm, and then it shifts rapidly, you can understand sort of getting upset about that. I myself kind of romanticize the idea of going back to the 90s when things were simpler, when we had pack odds, when there were no Safari parallels. It was a better time. Even 2019, sometimes I'm like, oh, if I could just go back to then when wax was still somewhat affordable and things like that.
I'm going to debate with you, though, that the 90s were actually a better time.
It probably was not.
I feel like everybody romanticizes the past, and then you forget things like there wasn't grading, for example. Or I think PSA was, starting up during that period, but grading was not widespread. Yeah. There were lots of fakes. There were lots of scams. It was hard to get. Card liquidity was extremely difficult. You would get murdered when you want to go sell a card. Yeah. Any dealer would pay you a small fraction of what the Beckett price guide said it was worth, and you didn't really have other outlets to sell because there wasn't eBay and there wasn't, all these online marketplaces that we had today. I don't know. Like I know in many ways it was a simpler time, and in many ways it was a less good time as well.
It's like anything else. We can romanticize the 90s and wrapping our landline cord around us as we're trying to cook dinner or whatever, and it's like, oh, that was so fun. Cell phones are pretty useful, right? So there's a lot in this space.
You're going to miss HDTV when you go to watch, TGIF on Friday nights on ABC, right?
Yeah. I think where things are going wrong is that there's this overarching idea by some of these people who aren't happy that the hobby has just been overtaken by usurpers. There's been this coup, right, of rotten flippers, of investors, of gamblers, of degenerates, of greedy people from the corporations all the way down to the individuals, and that only true collectors can save the day and can stop these evil forces. And that's what really brings us to our conversation, our topic for today. It's this idea of what's being called a collectors coalition. And Patrick Ryan, who I know you've talked to, I've talked to, at the P. Ryan collection on Instagram. He posted a little green square with some text on it like people do. and put up the idea of this collectors coalition. I'm just going to read exactly what he said.
By the way,
because
Patrick
it's
Ryan,
important.
amazing collection.
He-
A good follow. Opinionated
Good
guy.
follow. He's
Don't
got
always agree with the opinions,
Yeah.
but an amazing collection.
Correct.
Very knowledgeable in many
Yep.
ways about the hobby and its
Absolutely.
history.
Yeah. So here's what he said. And this is a quote. Lots of concern about the hobby focus shifting from collectors to flippers and consumers. Why doesn't someone start a union or a coalition of sorts for hobbyists so as to advocate for things that we in capitals care about? And then he goes on to list a number of topics that the coalition might discuss and try to lobby for. So that ignited a bit of a firestorm of comments, in that thread. And then he did a few follow-up videos on that to sort of clarify what he was talking about. So I recommend, if you're interested in this topic, go look at and listen to all of that. But I sent him some DMs. That's probably the best thing to do, right? When you're like, hey, what are you trying to do exactly here? And what he said is, hey, look, I don't have time to do this myself, to like head it and spearhead it and run this thing. But I am willing to help fund it, give some money if it's needed to set up technology or something else. He just wants sort of a collective voice to help educate people on safe collecting practices, differentiating between types of autographs, a lot of what he already does in his IG lives and other things, and to help prevent people from getting scammed. Now, some of his other things that he kind of talks about is where I think we start to draw a line and say, what is realistic versus unrealistic? Unsurprisingly, he felt very much like his words were being twisted, misinterpreted. People were taking and run with it in a completely different direction. Doesn't surprise me. Does that surprise you?
Not whatsoever at all.
Anybody who's a so-called influencer.
Yes. Welcome to content creation, right?
Welcome to the world of social media. So there's even differences of opinions, obviously, amongst people who want to define what it means to be a true collector. And again, it's prompted a series of ideas. I think what's really important, and where I want to start this conversation, is a little bit higher than that. We'll come eventually and finish with this idea of a collectors coalition, but there are three things I want to talk about. One is this idea of this dichotomy between investing and collecting, and whether or not that's even a real dichotomy or a false dichotomy. The second is the critical need and the ability to make critical distinctions. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit more, but it's something that I think is kind of a little bit lost in our modern time, especially on social media. And then third is what I'm branding as visceral tribalism. So we're going to go through each of those three things. I'm going to explain what I mean, and then I just, obviously want your feedback to weigh in on those things. So the first one, collecting versus investing. I think this is actually just a false dichotomy. The vast majority of people participating in the sports card hobby not only buy, but sell cards. Now, they might sell them because they don't like the card anymore, because it's not something they have space for. They're consolidating, a whole bunch of different motivations. But what you use the proceeds for when you sell a sports card should have absolutely no bearing on what other people think of you. You sell the card to fund your PC? Awesome. Most of us do that. Most people participating in the hobby do that. I sold these cards, now I'm buying this card. But if you sold the card to put food on your family's table, to buy a new furnace, to buy a new car, pay for your kids' education, buy a Gucci bag, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's a free market environment, and people love to criticize that dynamic. It's as though if you're not using the money that you make from the cards to buy other cards, just to keep funding your own PC, you're not a true collector. You're doing it wrong. And I think what's really important in this space, in contrast to that, is recognizing the diversity of motivations and approaches in the hobby. I've had periods myself over the last 4 years where the vast majority of what I was buying was with the idea that I think this player is going to go up. I think this is a long-term hold. I'm speculating, and I want to flip these cards and make a little bit of extra money. Over the last year, a lot of what I've been buying outside of some very targeted strategic buys has been heavily for my PC. And I used a lot of those proceeds to do that. I also just bought a new furnace. So you can do that. What do you think about this idea that people kind of blow this out of proportion, in my opinion?
I think it's very blown out of proportion for a few different reasons. First of all, people blame, the last few years on speculators rushing into the hobby and flipping and all this. And absolutely there was an increase in that, as we saw in 2020 and 2021, as prices were surging and a lot of people were getting into it because of the speculation and the flipping. But the general premise that people are interested in what cards are going up and down and how their collection's doing and when it might be time to sell a card or when they can buy a card for cheap and then maybe flip it down the road for profit, that premise was every bit as alive when I was a collector back in the 1980s as a kid. And I know that because my happiest day of the month was when the Beckett Price Guide would arrive into my mailbox. And by the way, those Beckett Price Guides have hot cards and cold cards, and have for many, many, many years. And that's a section of the price guide that a lot of people love to see. Our top 5 cards that we do on our Sports Card Investor channel that a lot of people criticize for being the driver of this kind of flipping mentality. Dr. Beckett had that in the Beckett Price Guide forever.
Yeah.
It's the hot list and the cold list. Yeah. And people loved it. People love it. You know, I loved it as a kid. All of my friends loved it. We'd all compare the price guides and we'd be excited to see that the card that we bought for 50 cents is now worth $3 according to the Beckett Price Guide. Now today, you've got a lot more liquidity. So you got the ability to actually get in and out of cards way more quickly than you really had back in the 1980s. It was kind of false liquidity back then. Now it's actual true real liquidity. So people get in and out of these cards and honestly, that's part of the fun of it. For some, not for everybody. Yeah. And I get that. But I am both a collector and an investor. I feel like many people are. As you just said, there's cards that I buy that I am not emotionally attached to, but that I think are a savvy buy, and I'm going to be excited. My emotion comes from watching that card rise or fall over the course of the upcoming season. Very similar to why I play fantasy sports or sometimes even gamble on sports, right? The same thing. And then there's plenty of other cards that I buy because I love the card and I want to hold on to the card. And sometimes I'll sell a speculative card that I made some money on and I'll buy a card just for my personal collection, as you just said. In fact, I just did it this last week where I sold a couple of cards and then I bought a really super amazing high-end Tim Tebow card that, definitely not an investment card, but a card that I'm super excited to have in my personal collection. I think it's fine. Like you want this to be a free market because that's what keeps money coming in. Like we've seen, as much as the spike and then the subsequent, severe fall in card prices over the last couple of years, as much as that wasn't super healthy for the industry, like I do wish it was more of a slow but steady, sustainable ascent. The spike and the crash, that wasn't great. But at the same time, what did it do? It ushered in a ton of venture capital investment into the hobby. It ushered in a ton of technology and progress. And we've seen companies like PSA collectors invest hundreds of millions of dollars into new facilities and new technology and, better communication and all of this, stuff. So, better integration with marketplaces and all of these things to make the collecting experience better, right? Yep. And we've seen company after company after company reinvest a ton of money to make the collecting experience better. And a lot of the reason why all that money and capital came in was because there was a surge in interest in investing and speculating and flipping and all this kind of stuff. So, obviously I've never had an issue with it because a lot of our content, less today. We do more collector content today than we did at the beginning. But in the beginning, our content was very heavily focused on cards going up and down and everything like that. So I'm with you on that front. And it's a point of contention with a lot of collectors. And to go back to the point that I said earlier, that, having a coalition, like that's one of the challenges. If you're going to have people on there who are going to say cards should not be investments. Yeah. Cards should only be for collecting. If people are trying to speculate on a card, that's bad. Those people no one should appeal to those people. They should be ostracized. And that's where this whole thing could go wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah. Perfect segue into the second point. Okay. And this is this idea of making critical distinctions. And what do I mean by that? There's 3 different categories we could look at. Anything you're assessing within the hobby, and you look at it, you could put it into one of 3 buckets after you have sort of a reaction, a favorable or an unfavorable reaction. The first is it illegal, unethical, immoral? That's the first bucket. Those are very clear. The second bucket is it poor etiquette? Is it bad etiquette? Is it rude? Is it not how you should be doing things? And the third is personal preference. So we can unpack a few pretty obvious, but I think useful examples here, right? First example, let's say I'm a dealer at a card show and somebody walks up to me and they're distracting me and saying, would you do this? Would you do this? While their buddy steals my cards. Okay. That's obviously wrong. We see those videos surface on Instagram of people getting caught doing these things. there's nobody out there debating that this is a good thing.
Right. You don't need a board to tell you that's
You don't need
wrong.
a board for this. You don't need a board to tell you that scamming people, that, it's not coining photos and then sending the wrong card or the wrong copy of a card or something else is
A
wrong.
breaker taking the pack off camera and stealing the hit. Everyone knows
Yeah.
that's wrong.
It's not bad that those things surface on social media and that these people, try to bring them to justice, especially if you don't know who they are or if they're getting away with it on a platform, a breaker platform or something. So we can all agree on that. The second category, bad etiquette. Let's say somebody walks up to me. I've got this card on my dealer booth and it's priced at $1,000, and somebody comes up and they're like, "Would you take $1,000 or would you take $300 for that?" And you're like, "No, it's I have it at $1,000," and they just kind of go, "Whatever," and they just walk away from you, right? That happens. That happens a lot. People walk up and they're out on the prowl and hunting. It's irritating. It's not good etiquette. It's not how you should interact. But when you leave the card show at the end of the weekend and then you go on Instagram and you post to your IG story only to your followers who you're probably friends with in a thing that's going to disappear in 24 hours or less, how angry that makes you. You're not actually affecting any change. You're not doing anything. You're just griping, right? That person sees it, they're not going to care. Anybody else who does that, they're not going to care. What you could do, if you're really passionate about it, is yourself independently, somebody else, get a group of dealers that you know together and put out some educational content. Spend the time to put together a little series. Hey, here's the right and wrong way to interact. I've seen some videos like that over time. Some people have done that. Try to promote that. If you do something like that and you think it's awesome, send it to us. Say, "Hey, would you mind posting this out on your Sports Card Investor website?" Or, maybe we can talk about it on a channel or something like that. Be constructive, be forward thinking, not just sort of cynical and critical. The third category is the one that I think is where things are just, the wheels sort of fall off. And that's the category of personal preference. If somebody goes to a card show with the express purpose of trying to buy cards at 50 or 60 or 70% of comps, to just flip it at the show for 100% of comps, you might not like that. There is nothing wrong with that. There's just not. It's a free market environment within the sports card hobby, whether it's at the show, at trade night, anywhere else. And there's an almost unlimited list of things that fall into this bucket of personal preference. And that's where I see, if you look through the comments on some of Patrick's posts and you see people that get rid of this thing, repacks are evil, this and that and the other thing, that's your preference. That's not even bad etiquette. That's not illegal. It's not any of those things. You can unpack what those things look like, but what's your reaction to that? Because I just don't see people making these distinctions. I think it's really important.
So I totally agree with you on the personal preference. And there's a lot of things that people, that are really more of a personal preference that people take very passionately, though.
Yeah.
The category that actually concerns me more is the etiquette category. Because if you get a regulatory board or a coalition or something of that nature, that's where that category is where I think things become real tricky. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. We've talked about this some in the past. What is your overall opinion on a high level? How does backyard breaks make you feel?
I don't like their style.
You don't like the style?
I don't like their style.
Some would say that they have bad etiquette. Some would say, I don't know if you're going to go that far. I know you don't generally like this style. This style is shirtless guys, rambunctious, bouncing around, not kid friendly, and just, craziness on the camera. Yeah. It's fraternity house. It's Animal House. It's like Animal House, right? Yeah. That's kind of what backyard breaks is. And there's many that would say that's bad etiquette. And then there's many that would say it's great entertainment. And there's a reason why they've built up the most incredible, the biggest following in a short period of time that any breaker has done. It may not be the style that you like.
Right.
It may not be the style that I like, but it is an entertaining style that many, many, many like. And it's in many ways in tune with, maybe the younger generation that's on TikTok and they like, kind of a more of a, frenetic style, and they like personalities of that nature and everything like that.
That's the key.
And that's where the etiquette thing, I think, starts to become challenging.
Yeah.
Because there would definitely be a lot of people out there that would say that's bad etiquette, like those guys. And I don't want to just pick on backyard breaks.
Yeah.
There's plenty of guys. I mean, Blez, Blez, who was here in the studio, and I'm friends with Blez, and I like the Backyard Breaks guys too. I'm friendly with them. And, I think Blez is a smart, interesting guy, and his family's done really well in the car business. And, but, he's got a personality that, is flamboyant on Instagram, and his shirt's off, and he's dancing around, and recently he's been flashing all of these giant bets that he's making and all this stuff. And there's a lot of people that will look at that and say, that's bad etiquette. That's not what the hobby needs. And then there's other people that are going to look at that and say, this guy's entertaining as heck. I love him. I love following him. I think he's super funny. And this is exactly what the hobby needs. That's where the challenge is, like with any type. So then it's like, if you can't get a group of people to agree on etiquette,
yeah,
and you can't get a group of people to agree on personal preference, then you're really only back to that first category, which was things that are obviously bad.
Yeah.
Scams, trimming, basically those categories, right? Shill bidding. I mean, things like that, right? That are like, but everyone kind of agrees that's bad. And so I agree. Like that's the challenge. It's like, okay, everyone can agree that certain things are bad, but then can we get actual, mind share on the next set of things down from that and actually set a respectable standard for the hobby? Or are you going to have large swaths of people that are like, oh, I don't agree with that. So like this coalition can't tell me what to do. These guys shouldn't be empowered. Yeah. It's really challenging. Yeah. And I think, the thought process behind it, I think, is noble and good. And I know you're going to get to some of your own thoughts on how maybe it could be proceeded with. But it's a good idea, but then when you actually put it into practice, I think that's where it becomes challenging.
Yeah, you're teasing out a few things still on my notes, and that's really good. And also, what the most important thing you just said is basically pointing out that the hobby is nothing more than a microcosm of the world that we live in. Our current, social experiment that's happening with the intersectionality of all these social media platforms and the human existence, right? So in the same way that I don't try to go change the way TikTok works or Instagram works or any of these things, I also think it's futile in a sense to try to think you have some kind of a voice that's going to collect and say, it's time to shut Backyard Breaks down and all breaking and everything. It actually makes me laugh. Like you can't do that. And that's some of what we'll unpack. Just unfollow it. Just don't follow it. Just don't embroil yourself in it. Find your tribe, which is the next topic, and spend your time with them. And if you're passionate about it and you have a choice, let's say you're a parent, right? You're like, well, I don't want my kids exposed to this stuff. Don't expose them to it. Don't let your kid have whatnot on their phone if you don't want them to see Backyard Breaks, There's ways to go about that, and every parent has to make those decisions about what they are or are not okay with.
By the way, there's plenty of worse stuff on the internet that whatever Blez is doing, dancing around with his shirt off, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point. So, but to your point, obviously, if they're realizing success, so to speak, and they're growing, there's a demand for whatever it is they're putting out.
Absolutely. They got fan bases. They get huge fan bases.
Whether you like it or not.
Massive fan bases. Yeah.
So the third topic is this visceral tribalism. This is when this happens to everybody. I don't care who you are. If you're on social media, even if you go to a card show sometimes, there's this sort of like, how dare you disagree with me on even one point of anything about the way that I know, not even I believe, I know this is how the hobby should be. I've been doing this a long time. And you get sort of these heightened emotional responses from these anonymous Instagram handles with no faces behind them, with no people behind them, with nobody actually willing to talk to you in the DMs, let alone have a live conversation. They just seem to exist only to spam in your comments and get upset, and put all kinds of their critical thoughts all over it is what you're doing. I think it's okay to have a tribe, right? That's actually very normal. Birds of a feather flock together. We all have friends who we have things in common with, and the hobby in that regard is no different. But some tribes, and I shared this on my own Instagram recently, some tribes just seem to only want to spend their time spamming others' comments. It's almost like, I don't know this, but it seems like they all just sort of like must have a DM chat with each other and like, hey, time to go spam this chat with the same thing over and over and over again to try to annoy this person or whatever. Or they, frankly, in my opinion, waste their time just creating crude memes that they only post out to their IG stories too of you and other people as though that's going to change anything. And I'm not talking about Lameme James, whose stuff is largely hilarious. It's kind of comedic relief. I'm talking about just dumb, crude things that nobody else is going to see or care about. That's what you choose to spend your time with. You have nothing better with your time to do. They just complain about everything. Some of them take an even more like pontificating approach, and they'll do 2-hour like Instagram live streams or make a YouTube video where all they do is complain about how everybody else does everything. What do you think that's going to do? Nobody else who disagrees with you is going to waste their time watching that content. And then the other people who do, it's just, you're sort of like living in this echo chamber. So from my perspective in this tribalism, space, one of the beautiful things about the hobby is there's so many different ways to participate in, almost unlimited ways to participate, from the most specific niche all the way up to very broad and diverse ones. I did that video a year and a half ago on the 27 types of collectors. That was very well received, and it was a lot of fun and by no means comprehensive into all the different ways that you can collect. But I think it's frankly absurd, and it's almost a sign of immaturity when people lose their minds that you're not doing things by their playbook, that you're not adhering to their secret 10 commandments of the hobby. And those people just need to acknowledge, like, again, the hobby is nothing more than a smaller representation of humans, of the world that we live in. And frankly, there are much bigger problems. I just don't get it. I understand being very passionate about the hobby, but I don't understand seemingly spending every waking moment tracking what you or Ken Golden or anybody else that's deemed an influencer is doing with their time. Go do something more constructive and focus on topics that matter more in society.
I mean, I've always felt that way. But, yeah, I get the brunt of a lot of that stuff. And I just and I've said on the show before, like sometimes I see some of that stuff and I'm like, I hope whoever's spending the time to create this meme or to make this attack video or whatever, I hope they are spending that much or more time in putting that type of passion, that degree of passion towards something constructive, like building a business or spending time with their family and loved ones or working on the book they want to write or whatever it is. Like, I hope they have outlets, because they're clearly passionate people and individuals. And I would love to see them direct some of that passion maybe towards even something that actually builds the hobby in a positive manner, that makes the experience better for everybody. That would be create some educational content, write some blog posts, contribute to online forums in a helpful and constructive way, answer the thousands of questions that newbies are posting every day to Instagram or to YouTube comments or that type of thing. Like, pay it forward, contribute in a positive way. It would be great to see. But look, this is also somewhat society. I mean, it's the way politics is in our country. And I mean, this is very representative of that, the tribalism around different politicians and the attacks that take place back and forth and people who just, large swaths of people that just get so caught up in it. They spend so much of their day, posting or commenting on political stuff. And I don't know, I don't know. It's a frustrating thing for me, not just in the hobby, but it's a frustrating thing for me with society in general right now. Obviously, social media and the access that everybody has to it has made it more accessible for people to do that. Yeah. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy because it's not advancing any conversation forward in a positive direction.
Exactly.
It's all just like when you read the comment threads, whether it's a hobby or politics or whatever, it's just a lot of people yelling at each other, expressing their own viewpoint that they're not willing to change because they're not actually having any real discussion. Nope. They're just throwing barbs back and forth at each other over a fence. And so, as you said, it's either them talking to their own side of the fence in an echo chamber, or it's them firing shots across the fence at the other people who then are firing shots back, but nobody's listening. Everybody's just,
completely unproductive.
I don't know what you do with it other than just stay out of it, and try to be the good, try to be the positive.
Yeah. So that brings us to back to this point of a collectors coalition, of this idea of bringing people together. I've got 3 kind of comparison points. I'm going to go through what I think is unrealistic and unfruitful, and then what might be realistic and could actually be done. But I wanted to start this one with your thoughts. Like, what's your overall reaction to this idea of a collectors coalition? It's something that we've even talked about internally over the last few years of just at least trying to have some kind of like foundational ethics to the hobby or something. So what do you think about, what Patrick posted and any other thing you've seen about this?
Well, one of the biggest issues with starting a collectors coalition or anything of that nature is the person who forms it has to be such a widely well-regarded neutral person that nobody's immediately going to say, oh, this is BS because that person's got some type of slanted point of view or something like that. You and I have talked previously about, should we create some type of like, not even necessarily coalition per se, but some type of organization to just help with some of the foundational principles of the hobby. And I've been nervous to do it because I'm like, there's groups of people that have strong negative opinions about me.
Yeah.
If I come out as the front person on this, there's going to be people who are like, that's bad because it's something Geoff's doing, so it's bad. And unfortunately, if you go across and you think about like all of the prominent people in the hobby, there's swaths of people that just have an opinion about that person. But that's true in any, like there's no, anytime someone becomes known like that, there's swaths of people that don't like that. I mean, I've even heard, like, I'm amazed sometimes, like the guy, like probably the guy who I think is maybe the most of the guys who are currently super active, the guy who I think is maybe kind of like the most, neutral and frankly, very like wanting to do the right thing, wanting to help people out, wanting to be a great collector experience, like a very altruistic businessman in the hobby at a high level is Nat Turner. Yet there's still swaths of the people that don't like Nat and that attack Nat and attack PSA and attack collectors and this, that, and the other. And, Card Collector 2 is a guy who's like, I know, like he couldn't be possibly nicer and possibly just sweeter and more genuine, yet there's still swaths of people that don't like Card Collector 2 for whatever reason. Dr. Beckett was the name that I had suggested. He's the one guy maybe because he's like this, greater, he's like the GOAT of the hobby, right? He's like this father figure who is obviously now retired from Beckett and has been for several years and is just considered in many ways like really the founder of the modern era of the hobby. I think many consider him that. And so, I maybe him, but it's like, that's like the difficult thing. It's like, who is able to actually take the lead and universally gain the respect of everybody? I don't even know if that's possible in this divided paradigm world. Maybe you could have some of the big companies come together and do it, but everyone has their opinion about the companies. Like if it's just Fanatics trying to do it, everyone's going to be like, oh, Fanatics, if it's just Panini trying to do it, oh, how can you have bad quality control and be doing non-player worn, game worn patches and then tell us, the foundational principles of the hobby. Like everyone's going to have that opinion. Now, maybe if Fanatics plus Panini, plus Upper Deck plus Leaf all came together and agreed to a set of things, maybe then it's tough. So that's step one for me. Like, I don't know how you get past that. I don't know how you create something that everybody universally is going to buy into, but I don't know, maybe you have ideas.
No, I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head with the inherent challenge to this, right? That this is the biggest challenge. And already, if you go on the comments on Patrick's posts and other things, and I've seen, it's like everybody just starts chewing each other up and spitting each other out. And it goes back to this visceral tribalism thing. It's like, yeah, let's get rid of this and let's get rid of this. And then suddenly, oh yeah, and this too. And somebody's like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, I like that. Or what's wrong with that? And it's like, well, how do they're going back and forth. So I think what's unrealistic is that some random group, collection of people who apparently all are going to need to be on Instagram to even know that this thing is happening, right? Never mind all these other people. Some group of 10, 100, even 1,000 people somehow coming together and forming this coalition is going to impact the behaviors and activities of an estimated 1 to 3 million people per Fanatics numbers and market research who bought or sold a sports card last year. The vast, vast, vast majority of people in the hobby are not on Instagram at all, or if they are, it's for their personal things and not for sports cards. They're not in Facebook groups. They're not on blowout forums. They're not on anything to that extent. They don't even know our channel or anything on YouTube, right? They just like cards, and they like buying and selling, and maybe they like breaks, and maybe they've gotten into this in a new way. What could be realistic, and this is not a hobby coalition, you mentioned them, is sort of the undeniable reality that Fanatics is the mover and shaker going forward for the foreseeable future in the hobby. In terms of the ultra modern hobby experience, they're the ones who are going to be creating the bulk of the new products, have the licenses. It would be great to see them lean into this a little bit in the same way that we saw Beckett recently actually go out and look for feedback from the community. Lots of people were involved in that process of them trying to kind of save face and say, okay, what should we do with our grading scale? What else would you like to see from us? And Fanatics could certainly do that. They could pull some levers, find out who are the big quote-unquote influencers, bring them in if they want to be part of it, and then also just go out and identify those other people who are just very respected longtime dealers, collectors. But it needs to be a group that represents all these different niches in the hobby, not just like only the collector, but everybody. So I think that's really important, and they could bring them together. At the same time, if you're one participating in that, I think you'd need to have a really realistic expectation and say, just because I agree with this, or even if this group of people agrees on something, doesn't mean they need to listen or are going to. Why is that? Because it's a business. It's an industry. Jeremy Lee just had a soundbite extract from one of his videos that he posted on Instagram, essentially pointing that out. He's like, look, you can be collector, hobbyist, whatever. This is an industry. It is still an industry with a hobby. It's an industry at the foundation of a hobby. Fanatics paid really good money, top dollar, for these licenses to outbid the other companies, and they're continuing to put money into it. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Don't expect that just because something ruffles your collector feathers that it means it's going to change what they're doing.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
So that's the first thing. The second one is something I think that is fruitless. If somebody did say it, well, I still think I can go forward with this coalition idea, is using web forums and Instagram stories and Instagram chats to actually think you're going to effect change. It's just going to be an echo chamber. It's going to be some combination of echo chamber, and you're tearing each other apart. People, are on social media, but they're sort of caricatures of themselves on social media. We know this. We interact with people. I've interacted with people who have criticized me or criticized you in person at card shows, and then it's a totally different experience, right? It's one thing to be a keyboard warrior, typing out, getting really angry, saying things you don't mean, or just feeling a little too free to express yourself on a particular day. That's not, social media is not where you're going to kind of generate the ideas and come together. It's where you could ultimately spread ideas worth sharing, like a TED Talk, type thing, and share them. But instead, what's reasonable, in my opinion, is however you're going to form this group, and maybe it does start in terms of recruiting, you need to be having live conversations. You need to be having like Zoom calls, cameras on. If you're physically located in the same area, maybe you spend an evening at the National just talking about things, and you got to zoom in on specific topics that everybody's passionate about and have really good representation on those things. There's a way to do that. There really are ways to do that. You could take notes, and then again, you could partner with somebody. You could come to us and go, hey, look, okay, we've sort of decided and realized after listening to Teapot talk that mystery packs are not inherently evil. Mystery packs are not bad etiquette, but there are bad mystery packs.
Sure.
There are really scammy mystery packs. So here's what we've come up with. Here's some good principles to help buyers who like mystery packs make sure they're not getting ripped off. You should have some transparency of what's included, whatever, all of these types of things. That's the way that, you could actually do something constructive. Going back to this model of just, I'm going to expect something to change and some big changes to be affected by having an hour-long Instagram live that nobody's ever going to watch is not going to do anything.
Right.
Third thing, and the last one, is I think that, I lost my notes here. Okay, so unrealistic. Trying to get certain activities, I just mentioned mystery packs and breakers and things canceled. I see this. Mm-hmm. I see this all the time. Cancel breaking. It's bad. It's gambling. It's degenerate. It's people are losing their shirts. Whatever. cancel repacks, cancel insert whatever thing that you don't like. How? You can't do it. This is a business. The only way any of these things could ever be canceled is if there was actual, real regulation, like you mentioned. And I don't know about you, but I cringe. I actually cringe at the idea of regulation in the hobby. If there's anything that I could see making me jaded or just sort of setting aside at least the ultra modern hobby, it would be regulation. There's already a lot of hoops to jump through with changes to tax codes and what you can buy and sell. And, that's very complicated now with those thresholds being much lower. Regulation freaks me out. Again, I'll go back to this idea that you could just, come up with best practices, like good etiquette and what these things look like, not, throwing your voice out there and just saying, I don't like this, cancel culture, rampant. Any of those things stand out to you or jog any other thoughts?
I mean, I agree. I don't think anyone actually wants regulation in the hobby. No, I mean, I think you're right there on a lot of fronts. I mean, and look, the idea behind all of this is noble. Like it's the idea of like, let's make the hobby better. Let's make the hobby safer. Let's get rid of some of the scamming that goes on. Let's better educate people. Like that's all noble, but I don't know that you get there through regulation. I do think you get there through education. I do think you get there from, as you said, if repacks are a concern, which they are, I think you can get there through educating the consumer on what's a good repack versus what a different, what's a bad repack. And if you wanted to create some form of standard that, here's how, a repack should be set up in order for it to be a good repack, the way to actually get that adopted is not by having some coalition announce it. It's actually by having the top 5 or 10 repack creators buy into it and them to say it, because then it's actually coming from the people themselves. Likewise, if you want to set some rules for breaking, like you can never take the card off camera, this, that, and the other, to help prevent some of the scamming, which would be positive because we do see that as a problem. Your best path is to get the 10 biggest breakers to have a meeting and to get them to draft a list of principles that they all agree to follow. Yeah. And then they need to be the ones to post it out. And then what you're going to see is some of the smaller breakers adopt it. Maybe you'll even see some of the platforms like Whatnot, Fanatics Live, pay attention to it. If their biggest breakers are the ones saying, here's the rules, here's what needs to happen, that's actually the approach that I could see being more successful to all of this.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's exactly what it is. It's like if there is a niche, if there's a group responsible for some activity within the hobby, they're the ones that ultimately need to implement it. And I think that's perhaps also the challenge in this, what is ultimately this secondary market environment within collecting. It's all happening after the fact. A lot of the people who talk about collecting say they don't even really like pack opening. I'm like, well, the cards have to come from somewhere. And you liked the fact that card was 1 in 720 packs. You didn't, know, so somebody had to open it. So if you think, oh, it's so terrible that packs are expensive and you get nothing out of them, and so whatever, fine. Somebody else got you that card. Somebody else put it on the secondary market and made it available to you. So I think overall this idea is noble. That's what I told Patrick. I'm like, I get where you're coming from. I'm not sure how realistic any of this is at the end of the day, except in those small niches. And if you're part of that group, you can try to affect change within it. Just don't expect it, anything, massive to happen at scale. I think that's a different story. There's a lot of opinions. There's not a lot of overarching unity in the hobby right now, in really in any areas, but few kind of closing thoughts. I think people are really way too quick to sort of excommunicate other people for disagreeing on them. It's just sort of this cannibalizing effect that we see. And it's the same thing, like you said, in politics and other social issues and things. And it's the same thing in the hobby. From our perspective, and I know we've talked about this, we try to be very respectful of all those unique ways of collecting and participating. Even when I walk up and I saw somebody, you talked to Jeremy to show about an uncut sheet. I don't care about uncut sheets personally. Lots of people do. Great. And I actually like hearing from somebody about that. Hey, enlighten me a little bit. Change my opinion. Sell me on why you love this concept. There's nothing wrong with that. Encouraging healthy community. Again, it's this idea of a healthy tribe, not this visceral tribe that's just yelling at everybody. You talked about innovation. This is huge, right? You might not agree with all the different innovations, but these things are inherent to life. They continue to drive forward the way we do everything. Why do you want to keep some of that stuff out of the hobby? And some people sort of want to gatekeep on those types of things. A big thing, accept market realities. The whole hobby right now is free market. We don't want regulation. So when you see the price of a card shooting up to irrational points, I personally do sometimes enjoy making, market mover data dive videos about those topics, like
Mac Jones,
Mac Jones, Brock Purdy, anybody, Jimmy Garoppolo a few years ago.
Right.
You see these and it just makes you scratch your head, and it's kind of funny. And to me, then I just go, well, somebody was ultimately, at least allegedly, willing to pay this amount of money if it wasn't shill bid, which it may have been. I'm just going to go take advantage and buy, this John Elway card or this Brett Favre card or whomever for a fraction of the price and enjoy participating in the hobby that way. The last thing is personal accountability. And this could be a whole separate, episode that we could talk about sometime. But there's sort of this kind of prevailing dynamic within the hobby where some people think that they're like this third-party watchdog that needs to defend the little man. We're all spending our own money. We're all capable of making our own decisions. And taking personal responsibility and accountability for your own actions is just like a hallmark of being a mature human being, right? Maybe you got burned. Maybe you got ripped off. Just about anybody who's come into the hobby in the last 4 years probably has had that happen, has been burned, I know both of us have been. We call it the price of tuition. You live, you learn, you try to help educate other people. Oh, you're new. Make sure you have somebody coin a picture when you're buying online. Make sure you use PayPal goods and services. We have a list of those things in our Discord server trying to help protect people. But I hear far more often some person, some third party, like seeming like they feel really good about defending some other group of people, who were apparently ripped off or taken advantage of, way more than I hear anybody claiming themselves about how they feel like a victim of having been ripped off. It's sort of like, I should have been smarter. I wish I had known. I should have thought a little bit more about this, and I'm going to move on. And that piece is really important in all of this too. Again, put the positive message out. Explain to people how not to get ripped off instead of just like rushing with rash judgment to everybody and accusing them of being some kind of grifter or scammer or something to that effect. So let's come together, passionate collectors, lots of passionate voices out there. But be realistic about exactly what we can do here. And some of these things that are being discussed, I'm not too sure how realistic they are at the end of the day. It's been
a good conversation, Teapot. I appreciate you coming on. Obviously, you've got a lot of passion for the subject, and I'm curious to hear what the audience thinks as well. So for all of you out there, let us know in the comments what you think about this topic, how you would approach it. Does the hobby need regulation? Could the hobby benefit from a coalition? And if so, how would you approach it? I am curious to hear that. And of course, if you'd like to hear more from the show, keep in mind the show comes out every Thursday. It's on YouTube. It's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you can also follow It's Geoff Wilson on all the social platforms to get clips from the show. Thanks for joining, Teapot. Appreciate it today.
Always great to be here.
Awesome. Take care. Cool. There you go.